you look at the Volkswagen crisis, the lawyers would have said, hell no, don't admit anything. Let's see what we can figure out and find a way out of this thing. The CEO at Volkswagen was smart enough to say, well, you know what? That's brilliant. We could win the legal fight and we'll be a damaged brand. He said, no, we're going to admit the wrongdoing to the horror of the attorneys. We're going to come clean. And 2 years later, they were #1 brand in the world. And he understood that the reputation being preserved was more important than winning a court case or dealing with the regulators.
Welcome to Being Understood, a podcast where we're exploring what it means to be understood and talking with communicators who help organizations do that. Today we are welcoming our awesome colleague, Pat Milan. Hi, Pat.
Hi. No one else was available. That's why I'm here. You walked to the building and there was nobody else available.
Yeah, I think I called you our next victim, actually. Yeah.
Duly noted.
Yeah.
I think it's important, Pat's on, because I think on each of these we've talked about you, and so now...
What?
We do. We keep talking about you.
Now we can introduce Pat.
We've never given you a last name, though, so...
Oh, okay.
It's just Pat.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's the Pat.
The Pat.
Hey, that's important, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So who are you?
Well, that's a good question, depending on what day of the week it is. When you work agency life, you actually do wear so many different hats. I do have a title. I actually have 2 titles. Depends on who's introducing me. The title I had for a long time here was Creative Destruction Officer. And if you understand the concept of creative destruction, for most people, Apple is the best creative destruction company in the world. They compete with themselves. They break their own stuff and make something new all the time. They made the iPhone, which replaced the iPod, and on and on and on.
One of the best inventions ever.
Right?
So part of that role is to try and look ahead. What's going on in industry? What's happening in sectors? And doing the thing that clients hope that we can do, which is see around the corner a little bit. When you add up the elements of what's happening, can you start taking a look and say, here are things that are likely to happen. So that's a big part of my role. We've kind of changed the title because I think people were scared of a creative destruction officer. Like, is he going to come in and break shit?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Also, it bothered me because I'm a cyclist, and I don't want to mix up cycling and creative destruction. It would be dangerous for my health.
That's fair.
But these days, we call me a Chief Insights Officer. So that's what I'm doing.
So what is that?
There are a couple things to it. One, you take a look at the different sectors where we work, and we work in a lot of different sectors. It's interesting because when you do what we do, you don't have to be a uber expert in healthcare or finance or any of these other areas where we work. We really are very good at being generalists because in the end, we're kind of breaking down the problems that are happening. We don't need to make the medical device, but we may need to help the people that lead the medical device company to understand how to navigate some kind of a situation. So part of what I do is I take a look at the sectors where we have clients, and I am looking at who's disrupting it out there, what's happening. And I think 10 years ago, we might have gone in to talk to a client to say, hey, have you seen? It would be like, oh yeah, I'm completely aware. I don't think that happens as much anymore. And I think and COVID certainly made it worse, but I think everybody's heads are down. They're really dealing with complex challenges within their organizations. I don't think they see as much disruption on their horizon as they may have in the past. And I think they do count on us to say, hey, you didn't ask, but have you noticed? Do you see what's going on here? And then so we try to lay out those things, and I find almost never now does anybody go, yeah, we knew that. We find people going, oh, that's really interesting, and then they're like, well, what do you think it means? And I don't think that we can forecast with any great certainty. We're probably even worse than the National Weather Service in some aspects of it. But what we can say is we think some things that are likely to happen or things to be worried about, and you can kind of lay that out. And when you use that, you kind of start to build that muscle of seeing around the corners to understand. But you kind of have to pay attention to what's the recent past, what's going on now, who's disrupting it, and what's that mean? And so that's a big part of what I do. And then the other part of what I do is jump in like you guys on crisis work, Sometimes it's new tech, med tech stuff that's coming out and evolving. And I do board work too. I do too much board work. Liz, help me get off one of these
A
boards.
little bit of governance in your.
Yeah, a little bit of governance.
Yeah.
You're also, you just say it as a little bit of crisis. You work on a lot of catastrophic crises on
Yeah.
behalf of clients. You parachute in a lot at times where an organization's going through something very challenging to bring objectivity and bring guidance and counsel. You're one of a handful of people here who do that work, but
Yeah, well, you two are in that grouping
Yeah.
too. You know, it's funny because when people say to me, what do you do? I mostly lead with that. I say, I help manage organizational crisis. And I do think people think it's really interesting, and it is. The hours suck.
they usually start on
Have you ever
Friday afternoon.
Have you ever noticed? I mean, if people say, when will you know what crisis is coming? And I'll say Friday afternoon
Right.
or Sunday morning, because
Yep.
that's when they tend to. I think it's funny that we get the calls. I think leaders of organizations, usually they know what's going on, obviously. But I think they kind of reach Friday afternoons and they begin their freak out. Or they go home on Friday and they're not sleeping well Friday or Saturday, and then on Sunday morning we're getting phone calls. But it tends to be, those are the trigger days.
Right.
'Tis true. You also are a leader of what has really become a management consulting practice here. We called it that for a little while. We backed off because it's really our management expertise is in change and crisis communications. But talk about that, because I think when you guys talk about change, especially, and managing it or not managing it, we're going through so much change right now, and clients are going through so much change. It really can be a catalyst moment. So how do you see that practice and what we do here?
I remember being with Kathy Tunheim, the founder of this firm, and we were in Europe. And there was a consultant to this industry, and the consultant to the industry said that what we do, this firm in particular, because he knew what we did, and a handful of other firms around the world, he said, you guys are management consultants, and I almost spit my drink across the table. And I was like, I could never say that with a straight face. But he said, but you are. And, you know, he was ahead of his time, and Kathy in particular has really been ahead of her time for all of this stuff. But the point was made, and it was a good one, and it's really where we've built our chops up over time. You take a look at companies that have a challenge, and when they look at it and the biggest part of the challenge is technology, well, they're going to call someone like Accenture or Deloitte. You look at another organization where they may have a strategy issue or a lot of it's tied to finance, they're going to call McKinsey. People call us for what really is management consulting when they have to make a big change and they can't really force everybody to do it. They have to communicate to them the need for the change, the reason, and the way to get there and to get them on board. That is a function of strategic communication. And that's why we've managed to get hired for management consulting by groups like the United States Golf Association. You know, they were going through a big change. They couldn't force anybody to do anything, but they needed to communicate to large groups of people the need for dramatic change. So I always say we do management consulting work in areas where communication is the principal tool that is going to make this thing happen. And I think as we get further and further down the road, it tends to apply more and more because communication is so important. The world is no longer going to let you sit there and hide the ball and not ask what's going on, how are you getting there, how did you pay for it, and who's producing it. So you're going to have to communicate, and more often than not now we're being brought into these pieces, which I think you would have thought 15 and 20 years ago, no, you would have called the comms people after you figured it all out and said, here, write a news release.
Right.
Well, that doesn't work anymore.
Well, especially because I think the objectivity that we can bring, no matter, there are smart communicators, I will say, in every organization. But if you're inside, you don't have that objectivity to be able to see outside of it.
Yep.
And bringing that in to help you anticipate those risks, manage them, and thought plan through how are you going to bring people along on this journey, because you need people to come along with you,
Right.
to be successful. Most of the time, maybe you're lucky and you can just bring them on through, but most organizations need that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look at crisis situations and how things have changed. I mean, literally in the old days, that'd be 2 years ago, firms would, they'd call the lawyers. What do we do? And I remember, again, back to Kathy, but I remember the first time Kathy articulating, she said, well, the lawyers, they have an opinion and they have some direction, but that's based on legal structure. Mm-hmm. Well, you also have to worry about, are you a public company? Because there's another whole set of rules for that. Are you going to have to deal with the media? Because journalism, you know this, you grew up in the business. Journalism has its own rules on how they operate. Mm-hmm. And then you've got all of the other concerns. You've got an entire operation of team members behind you. Who's communicating and what are you communicating? And then you ultimately have your customers, and sometimes that may be consumers. And in the old days, you look at the Volkswagen crisis, the lawyers would have said, hell no, don't admit anything. Let's see what we can figure out and find a way out of this thing. The CEO at Volkswagen was smart enough to say, well, you know what? That's brilliant. We could win the legal fight and we'll be a damaged brand. He said, no, we're going to admit the wrongdoing to the horror of the attorneys. We're going to come clean. And 2 years later, they were number one brand in the world. And he understood that the reputation being preserved was more important than winning a court case or dealing with the regulators. And that just kind of shows you why, if you think you just need the legal advice, that's just one component. You need to understand how journalists work and their rules. You need to understand what's going on. Do you report to the SEC? I mean, all of those things have to come in.
All your stakeholder groups.
Right.
Then you have to take a look at, here are the options. And maybe fighting it is the right thing to do legally. But you better get advice for all those other quadrants, or else you're just looking at one thing.
Right, which makes me think of something I hear you and Kathy talk about a lot. So there's a crisis and there's a bad day. And a lot of the times, clients don't know the difference between the two. So talk to us about that.
Well, everyone, when things are going poorly, everyone thinks it's a crisis. Mm-hmm. The people who are smart enough to call early enough avert crisis, right? They're like, okay, we're heading down a path here. This is not good. And we get quite a few clients who call us very early on, and we're able to kind of look at it. A crisis, literally, you have to be able to look at it and say, this is an existential moment for the organization. We could really harm our reputation. We could lose business. We could lose customers, clients, employees could leave. That really kind of formulates what would be a crisis. We had one, Bess, I think you worked on this with me, but
Yeah.
you probably can't tell anyone or you'd have to kill them.
Probably.
We had another one where it was a hospital system, and through an oversight, some things they were using to screen patients just never got upgraded. Even the inspectors who came to the hospital over a 2-year period didn't even catch it. And when they caught it, they were horrified. And it wasn't like it was bad stuff or they were missing things. They just didn't have the newest one in. But to them, it was a crisis. And we were like, no, you're having a bad day. And so let's get the new stuff in. Don't screen anybody else in the meantime. But then we had another client where they had 2 years of erroneous radiation treatments for cancer patients over a 2-year period. People died.
Under and over treatment.
Under and over radiated. People were injured. That was the worst crisis I've ever worked on.
Yeah.
Liz, you know this. We had to write a letter that needed to go out to everyone, whether it was survivors or cancer patients, to tell them what had happened. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. And I kept saying when we were putting it together, I was like, somebody's going to come home. It's going to be after 5 o'clock. They're going to be about to sit down to dinner, and they're going to open up this letter and go, my cancer was improperly treated, and that injury I have is from it. Or my wife who died 2 years ago. And I said, what are you doing? And so I'm writing that letter thinking, these are people who are going to get letters and they won't be able to sleep. And that's when we said, someone's got to answer the phone 24 hours a day.
Right.
Someone's got to take responsibility for it. You've got to be able to talk to them in person, face to face. I'm really proud of the work we did on that one.
Yeah.
They didn't get sued by one patient or one family because they handled it so well.
So important.
Yeah.
Mistakes happen,
Yeah.
and following guidance to help you think about how do you manage those stakeholder expectations and bring them along in a journey is such an important aspect of responding. We jumped past your background, and I want to push you to share a little bit more because you have a really interesting and rich history. We have realized that between us, we've got 40 years of experience. I'm not going to ask
41
you to name
maybe, but
any
we knocked
numbers.
it down a year.
But you have a lot of really cool experiences in your background. So the quick synopsis of your journey. Your
You don't
work
want me to
journey.
talk about being a lifeguard on the ocean.
I mean, that's fine.
You can
can.
start there. I actually think it's very impressive.
Actually, it
that
was my
you
favorite
were
job
there.
in
Yeah.
all of history. I just didn't know it at the time.
Right?
I
We
was
have a
lifeguard.
lot of former lifeguards that work here. That is an
Yeah.
interesting
You know what?
connection.
Where's the company
Anyway,
pool?
Yeah.
We need
It's
one.
coming.
Yeah.
Don't
Is
worry.
it coming?
It's in the works.
You're working on that?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
that's good. I actually was a lifeguard on the Atlantic Ocean down in South Carolina. I was lucky. I grew up in a small town. I was working in radio illegally, full-time in radio all through high school. And I was lucky because I had a principal who himself really wanted to be a disc jockey. So he would actually pull me out of Spanish class and go, you want to go to the radio station? I grew up in the radio business with some really, really talented people. And I also understood working with people in their 40s in radio that was not a really good place to be for a long time because nobody was making any money.
Right?
And I did move into television news and worked in Savannah and then Orlando. And I always tell people I ran out of space, so I came back to the top of the map.
Yeah,
But I took a job and came here to Minneapolis, which this town is an amazing place to work in television news. It still is. It was then. I mean, I worked at KSTP. We had a helicopter, 3 airplanes, an unlimited budget, and we had people who actually watched the news. And our stories were longer until people like Beth showed up.
Right,
and said,
right.
It's got to be
Changed
a minute 28.
everything.
Yeah.
Minute 20.
Minute 20.
Minute
Oh my
20.
God. Yeah, I'm the guy that shows up with the
Yeah.
story. It's a minute 47, and you're like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna
Take a
kill
few
you.
sound bites out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my, yeah.
Yeah.
But I worked in the television news business. First place I ever met Kathy was at Honeywell. The Honeywell Project, which pretty much operated out of my church, St. Joan of Arc, would meet Kathy out there, and she was so smart. She would come out to meet protesters and bring coffee and donuts. It was just like, okay. She knew how to
Sounds right.
diffuse it. But then after television, I went to work at the Attorney General's office, where I worked with Jack Tunheim, who was Chief Deputy Attorney General. I shouldn't say Jack, he's John Tunheim to the rest of you, the Honorable, and had just some amazing experiences there. And then I met Kathy Tunheim on the steps of the United States Supreme Court because her husband, John Tunheim, had 3 cases, I think within about an 18-month period before the United States Supreme Court. That's where I really met Kathy. And I ended up leaving the AG's office and coming here. That was the first time I was here.
What year
He's
was
a
that?
boomerang.
1991. I
Okay.
think. Yeah.
Liz and I were barely born, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Let's keep saying that.
Yeah. I remember Liz being a toddler.
Yeah, I
moving
was.
I
around
can
the office here,
imagine.
so that's how. That's
Not
how
a toddler in this office. But
No, not in this office.
My brother probably was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I left here and went off and worked at a technology company. I don't have my phone. I left it in there. That had the patents on almost all of the stuff that delivers data to your phone today. Worked with some really, really smart people. It got bought up by Bell Labs. Worked on the startup of what eventually was DirecTV, and spent some time. Worked with Don King for a while. I know. It's just like,
Wow.
you said interesting background. It's schizophrenic, my background, because it's all over the place.
But I see these as collections because
Right.
then
Yeah.
you spent years at Fallon,
Yep.
which gave you a different view from an agency.
Yeah,
World.
Fallon was an amazing experience. I learned so much there. I know people say, oh, it's an ad agency. It was more than an ad agency. It's really where I learned some of the things that fold in so well with what we do here. It's all about business strategy.
Right.
And so I learned. I've stolen a lot of what I carry around in my head from Fallon from those days there. But I came back here. There's a lot of us wandering, wounded animals
There
that
are.
end up back here at
Yeah,
Tunheim.
I've noticed that.
Yeah.
I like to think of you as boomerangs.
Yeah.
You left and you came back.
Kathy
Yeah.
calls
There's
us
always an open
recidivists. But so all of that, working in television news, the beauty of television news, you have to write every day. You cover multiple stories.
Yeah.
And there's something you've never heard of in the morning, and by 5 o'clock, you better be just smart enough about it to talk to 60 to 100,000 people
Right.
about it. And try not to screw it up too badly. So the discipline of doing that and understanding how media works and what's really going on while they're trying to put it all together, it has helped me over the years. Bess is so good at it.
Yeah, I mean, it does make a difference coming from that background and really understanding the way people in the media think and just understanding like how quickly things are changing in the media landscape. And I mean, it makes a big difference when we're trying to pitch to the media or,
Yep.
get them to cover anything for us.
Yeah, so all of that kind of informs
Yeah.
the stuff, this terrible character that I am. No.
No, a collector. You have all these wonderful experiences that, and also just who you are is very curious, and you like to learn and you like to help other people learn. And I think that that's why you are great at the job
Well,
that you outlined that you
you're
set
very
up.
kind. You're very
And you're the reason I'm here. You kind of were a dog with a
Yeah.
with
You
a
know how many
bone.
times
Wouldn't
she said
leave me
no?
alone.
You
And
kept
I
saying
thought,
no.
I
I'm
did
not
not
going.
know
I'm not going to
this.
do it. Oh yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Pat was the one who was finally like, fine, I give in. And, and it's been a really fun ride.
Yeah, and there's a 17-year non-compete, by the way.
Yeah,
You can't
yeah.
leave.
Sounds good. You two have been teaching a lot of us about media today because it's changed and how reporters work, where they work, who they work for. All of those
Yeah.
things have continued to change. Talk a little bit about the change in media and what that means for being understood.
Yeah.
Go for
Liz
it.
has already heard this from me, so I'd love to hear your perspective.
So I still do a 4-hour radio show, but it's music. So I'm a disc jockey. again.
I've heard.
And I have a studio in the basement of my home, and I love doing it, and it brings me joy.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it makes me think it's 1977 again. But
Q Rock, right?
yeah.
Gotta look for Q Rock.
Yeah,
find
it's
Pat
on the
Milan
Live
show.
365 app, and
Yeah.
it's Q Rock Radio. But unless you better like music from the 70s and 80s.
Good classic.
You know what's
Yeah.
interesting? I was just talking about this the other day. It's what's really sad is particularly with radio. There's not much left there anymore.
No, there isn't.
These stations are running off computer laptops sitting next to a transmitter board. We still live in a very rich market where we have NPR. I bet they still probably have 100 people on their news staff over there. Maybe not. Maybe something
Maybe not
like-
quite that many,
Yeah.
but still a pretty big
They have a
staff
big
for their
staff.
operation. Yeah.
We have 1.5 daily newspapers. Sorry, St. Paul, but yeah, I don't know about that. It's still a rich market here, mostly because we have an engaged population that's civic minded. So we have that going. But as you look around the country, it's really shocking. Most of the newspapers in America are owned by billionaires
Yeah.
who are trying to save them. And one of them started to give up yesterday. Another billionaire said,
Yeah.
we can't go like this forever. All of that goes to the point that I think, help me out, Bess, I think since 2008, half of the people who were employed in the business of journalism no longer work in journalism.
Yeah.
So you have half the number of people covering more news. And television has changed so dramatically. When I was in it, I think people in television would be sad to hear me say, I did one story a day.
Yeah, it's definitely not how it is now.
No.
Yeah, how many is it now?
I mean, I would say you have some reporters, they'll turn a story on the same topic, but they'll turn 3 to 4 different versions of it
Yeah.
a day, which is crazy.
Some
And they're
of
also
them-
planning for a live shot. Some of them are going out and shooting and editing and writing their own stories too. So it's just,
It's
I
crazy.
can't even
many
imagine how crazy it is. And so, like, I've seen a number of people leave the industry not because they aren't passionate about what they do, they just are burnt out.
Yeah, it's too hard.
Yeah.
It's too much. So the point we're making is it's really tough to reach reporters.
Yeah.
If you do reach them, they're working on 3 other stories, and the last thing they want to hear is something you've got for them. So you really have to change your approach, which we've done here. We understand now the networking tools that help reporters find the stories that we've got, because what we have, we call them clients, but in their fields, they're experts.
Right.
And reporters do want to talk to experts, and they do want to find out what's going on and what does it all mean. But I think the most difficult thing we have to impress upon our clients and everybody else out there who's doing it, if you want to get covered, you better be saying and doing interesting things, because if you're not, nobody cares. So I think you have to look around the organization and say, are you leading the category? Are you doing something interesting? And are you willing to talk about it? Because half of them that are doing interesting stuff don't want to talk about it, but they still want to know why they're not in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, might not be the best place to be in the first place.
Right.
So reaching the audience of reporters is almost impossible now. You have to connect with them, and you've got to reach the ones who are writing about the things that you're doing, and it's a lot tougher than it ever was before, but it can also be really rewarding, because you're going to find a reporter who wasn't just pitched on something and they're going to try to write about it for the first time. They're probably pretty educated on it, and they're interested, and you got a chance to lock or attach expertise to somebody who's really looking for it. So that becomes what's the fun part of it.
Right. And I think it's hard sometimes to convince clients that it's not about the quantity of stories that you get, it's about the quality of the stories that you actually do end up getting for them. I mean, because they want more stories and they want to see themselves everywhere, but it's not really all about that. I mean, you're better off having one really, really solid story.
Yeah, or, by the way, I know you're really enamored with getting in the Wall Street Journal, but guess what? Business Insider might take you a lot further than the Journal ever would, just because of the way it gets passed around. So managing those expectations, helping clients understand what's going on out there and how it works, it's a big part of our job in that part of our job.
Yeah.
Removing names, protect the innocent, but you have stories of, like that example of Wall Street Journal, of a client saying, I want to be in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, getting those opportunities and it not being successful. Give one example of a not successful opportunity.
It's the
like
Wall
that.
Street Journal. We had a CEO who wanted to be in the Journal, wanted to meet with the Journal, and we were like, you're not ready. And by the way, they have a great story. And they are doing some really interesting stuff, but they're just not really willing to talk about it.
They feel like it's their IP and they can't talk about it.
Well, we didn't think they were ready. We didn't think the CEO was ready, but and we did not arrange it. They somehow locked up and got a sit down with a Wall Street Journal reporter. And they sat there and had the conversation for about 45 minutes, and then it was done, and the CEO said to the reporter, well, what do you think? She goes, well, I think you're a lovely person. It's really nice to meet you. I haven't heard anything here today what I would write about. And it was like, you just killed yourself with that reporter. She's just never going to want to talk to you again.
Yeah, I think it is a mistake when, and you said it too, we all want to see more. I mean, that feels like a part of our sales and marketing needs, right? But because of how hard it is to get visibility today and in the right audiences, and yet not being prepared or thinking you have a good story, but it's what you want to say, or it's your marketing language that's in your press release that nobody cares about because it's not presented in a way that is about anything else that's going on in the world. You are confusing effort and time with meaningful connectivity.
Well, I think the other part of it is, and this gets back to how you kind of do what essentially you would call connection planning in the advertising world, which is getting back to who is really critical for your organization's success. Who are those people, and what are the things that they read that would actually influence them to do something you want done or to help with your reputation. That's where you want to focus the effort. Even though you might want to be able to hand a copy of the Wall Street Journal to your mom to say, look at me,
Right.
CEO. Yeah, it's better planned the other way.
Yeah, we do understand those pressures that come on
And we do get
CEOs
people in the
and-
Wall Street
and
Journal. I don't want to
Right,
act like we
right.
never do that
and
either. but-
elsewhere. We
The
get
time has to
those,
be right.
But there's also just trust the knowledge of the people in
Yeah.
the room who understand that industry to when you're thinking about, do I like these people? Do I think that they can help us do this? And then let us do some of the magic that we know how to do too.
Yeah. And I was working with somebody who is not a client, but somebody who I've been chatting with who actually randomly got an article in the New York Times. And right afterwards, I think we've talked about this before, they didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
They reached out to myself and Kathy and are like, what do we do now? Like, we somehow got this article, but we're not prepared for this. Like, we're getting
Yeah.
so many emails and so many requests to just kind of do
Yeah.
the same thing that we're doing, but
That's
so it
also
can
a
backfire that way.
It's also a good challenge. Are you ready for that
Are
kind
you
of
Are you
prepared
ready?
for
Yeah,
success?
yeah, and they were
I-
not.
I've seen Kathy Tunheim say to more than one person, you're not ready for success.
Yeah.
Be careful.
Yeah.
Be careful what you ask for. Are you really, truly ready for it? Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah, and now nothing else is ever going to match that experience either.
Yeah.
So I've just seen them struggle quite a bit over the last few months trying to navigate through that,
Yeah.
which is tough.
You're on top of a mountain. Where do you go from here? Pat, talk about our positioning language of being understood. What does it mean to you, and why do you think it's important?
Well, first of all, I think I know this to be true. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I need to hire a management consultant, right? I mean, they'd rather get hit with a baseball bat across the head. But people do wake up and they are like, we have a significant problem in an area. And that's usually when we get a phone call. And we ask a lot of questions. And ultimately, when you kind of start to pull the layers back on that and you go through that process, what you learn from a lot of organizations is they're frustrated because they feel like the world doesn't understand what they do.
Right.
And that really is positioning. So, well, God help them if the corporate strategy's bad. I'm not sure we can help you. Might be going out of business. But most places have a pretty solid corporate strategy. They've got a board. They know what they want to do. They're fulfilling some kind of a mission or creating something the world needs. But what happens between that strategy and then the positioning of the company, which is understanding your unique role and what you do and how you do it, and then articulating it through either your design, your brand, and your messaging, and then how you go to market. All of that is impacted. And what happens when the positioning's wrong, because if you look at we got a diagram, we can show it to you sometime. You've got the corporate strategy, the next thing to it is positioning. If the positioning is off, none of the other stuff is going to work.
Right.
Your communication isn't going to work, your brand's going to be confused, your key messages are off, your people are confused, your customers are wandering. God help you, you're on your way out of business. Maybe, or you may wander along for a long time, but you're just not getting the growth you want. So in this process, even though on our chart it moves left to right from corporate strategy to positioning and then brand, identity, messaging, and then it goes out to channels and audiences and all that stuff. We actually start way on the other side. And we start with that question in our lovely conference room where we say, please write on the wall, who's key to success? And they tend to write about 110 to 175 entities, right? And
Right.
we're like, let's go back to the question again.
Yeah.
Who's critical? And it should be 3, 4, 5 off of that subset there. And then what we say is, this is where I always say we're in the gap analysis business. What do those groups think, know, and believe about you today? And what do they need to think, know, and believe about you on the other end in order for you to be successful? That gap is the sweet spot where we develop 2, maybe 3 strategies. There can be 110 tactical things, but there's probably 2 strategies to help you close that gap. And that's what we do in terms of our positioning piece. And what happens is your mission and your vision and your offering are clear, your people get it, your customers understand it, and you're picking the right channels and messages to go with it. And I know it sounds easy, but it takes a while. And there's a lot of baggage around it for a lot of organizations, because it's really interesting sometimes when you talk to the executive suite and what do you guys do? Well, we build superior parts for jets or whatever. And you go back into the plant and they go, we build the cheapest aircraft parts in history, and we cross our fingers every night when we go to sleep. Did I just reveal we work for the people who made the doors on those jets that flew off? No, we don't. We don't. And it's just interesting to see the difference between the two. But part of what we do is we go out and we talk to those groups, and we talk to them anonymously.
Right.
So that they can really be honest, because your customers will say nice things, particularly if you're in Minnesota. Nobody wants to offend anybody. But when you interview these people, whether they're customers or employees, and you say, this is totally anonymous, we're not going to use your quotes, we just want to really understand where the gap is, then people get real. And then you can kind of come back and say, okay, remember what we said about where you are versus where you want to be? Here's what needs to happen. And that's really a big part of, and I think it's a lot of the work that we do comes back to proper positioning.
How hard is it to build that trust, do you think, with clients?
With the clients?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. Well, they wouldn't be a client if we don't think we can build the trust. I don't think
Right.
we would go there. I think by the time we see clients, they're so irritated or tired of it not working well, they're willing to listen.
Yeah.
And I think they've tried everything else. And I do think, particularly when you get to C-suite level, when they're out talking to people and they're like, they don't get what we do, or we're not getting the business we should have gotten. We're getting passed over. I think they've just had enough of it. So, and maybe that's the pain factor that sends them
Yeah.
in, so they're willing to do it.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably scary. I mean, anytime you let a consultant in the room, it's scary, right? Because they're going to come in and they're going to bring observations. But the people who show up, they want to make it better. They want to get there.
Right.
They're tired of banging their head against the wall. So,
No,
yeah.
makes sense.
It takes a want to have different outcomes, though.
Yeah.
And I do think that that's not every client that we work with is ready for that, and
Or not everyone needs it either.
That's
also
true.
But I do appreciate that sometimes Pat's the bull in the china shop, making the observation, and you see which clients are comfortable with that road. But
Well,
it's certainly some of the more exciting work that.
You talk about the trust.
Got it.
We did this for a big PGA Tour event, not in Minnesota. I can actually say who it is because they don't care. But it was the Byron Nelson Championship
yeah.
in Dallas, and did this whole exercise for them. And we went out and talked to PGA Tour pros about their tournament. And the people who ran the tournament, they say, "Oh no, Tiger Woods tells us this is his favorite tournament." Vijay Singh loves playing here. Well, we went out and did candid interviews with all of them. Talked to 100 golfers. They hated the course. And when we came back and we went through, here's what your most important audience told you about your tournament, they fired us. So they just said,
Wow.
What's your agenda? What's going on? This goes to your trust question.
Yeah.
What's your agenda? And we're like, we don't have an agenda. We went out and anonymously did these interviews with people who were critical. They called about a week later and said, okay, we got over it, come back.
Oh my gosh.
And you know what? They built a brand new course because players said, you're a golfer, so you can get this.
Yeah.
The players said, you know what they hated about the tournament more than anything? Every tee shot, first shot was blind.
Yeah.
It's not blind for regular players, but it was blind for PGA Tour pros who can out-hit the fairway.
Huh.
And so they realized we need to either get a new course or build a new course. They built one. And so that kind of goes back to the trust, because
that's interesting.
they were angry. I remember I was like, what happened? But they'd never heard anyone say anything bad about it because people are genuinely nice. And the PGA Tour pros, you see them on TV every week. They go, "Oh, this is the best course and the best place. I just love it." And you're like, "No, they don't. No, they don't."
Right.
And there is something to learn from it, and you can make it better. And those guys actually lost their cherished date on the PGA Tour calendar for about 10 years. Then they built a new course, and guess what? They're back on the date they want. They're a better tournament for doing it, and it was kind of slipping away from them, and they couldn't quite figure it out. But it was hard to hear. Yeah.
Where do you see this going? I'm thinking about the media.
This podcast? Or the
Yeah. No. Media, it's harder to get visibility because, as you guys defined, harder to reach the right reporters, be in front of the right audiences than ever. We've got a population, at least in the U.S., that's pretty, well, I guess everybody gets news from where they want to get it. There's no longer one source. We all get it where we are going to get it. And we've got more organizations doing really cool things, but having a harder time being understood. Where do we go? Give us some future sense about
a good one.
Where do we go?
You want to go first?
No, you go first.
I will tell you that I'm optimistic, but this is a long-range thing. The one thing that is truer than ever is people really want to know what's going on locally. And that is a weakness right now that's not being served well. The thing that has impacted that was when I got into the radio business and then the television business, most stations were locally owned. They were family owned. And so what was appearing on the news was personal pride. And then Broadcasting and Cable Magazine did a story about having a broadcast license as a license to print money. And all of a sudden, everybody wanted to own broadcast properties, and they bought them all up. I think we're going in the other direction. The broadcast properties are not as lucrative as they were before. I think you'll see more local ownership return. I think you'll see fewer radio stations, but that do it better.
Yeah.
And I do think that they will deliver local better. And I've already seen it. It's interesting to me doing a 4-hour radio show that's classic music, but classic rock music. The people I hear from say they kind of got tired of their Spotify playlist, and they still wanted to hear what was going on, and they wanted some kind of personality around it because it gets after a while it gets lonely. That's how it felt to me.
Yeah.
So I'm optimistic that I think radio will get better, but it's going to go through a really ugly period because there's a lot of people who own radio stations who paid more for them than they can make right now, and I think that those licenses are going to go back, and I think local people will snap them up, and you may see a great return there. I think something similar will happen in television too. I think television's really feeling it, but they aren't going to be able to deliver it the way they always did over a broadcast, right? You're still going to have to meet. I don't have my phone, but it's still going to have to be delivered, and you're still going to have some kind of a relationship, and they're going to have to trust you. And I think the big thing that's coming is the trust bubble is going to get burst because news being delivered. TikTok is incredibly efficient, and it really does what an audience wants. But at some point, that audience is going to say, okay, that was really fraud, and I'm tired of being defrauded. And
Right.
I do think over time, the pendulum will swing. So I'm optimistic.
Yeah, there's the misinformation factor
Ugh.
of, is this real? I don't know. Some of it is to be funny. Some of it you're wondering, how much is this sarcasm? How much
Yeah.
is this
Right.
real? And then wanting to know that there's fact checking, which I do think is important to reiterate that you should look to a media source to share how it fact checks. There are many that do a very, very good job, and there are others that don't. And how do we get back to trust in media? And I think hopefully there'll be a resurgence of people who are looking for that fact checking to make sure they're getting information. I don't know, maybe I'm too optimistic
and I
there.
think what plays into that too is you're seeing more and more media outlets adapt to how people are now consuming news versus, expecting somebody to tune in to the 6 o'clock news at night. Like, it doesn't happen. So they're looking at ways how to, digitally put the news out there and, on the different social media channels. So I don't think TV stations even expect somebody to be tuning into the newscast every night.
That's sad,
Yeah,
but true.
but true.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got too many channels, too many streaming services, too many, all of these things. But
Yeah.
Well, I
But
think you
that's-
have a name for your podcast now. Sad but true.
You've had so many
that
names for
is
this.
what we are dealing with in this industry. And we continue to innovate around it,
Yeah.
and I appreciate you guys for helping lead that charge to have good answers.
Yeah.
We're living in interesting times. I wish they were a little less interesting.
Right?
But
Wouldn't that be
that's where we
nice?
are,
Just
yeah.
for like a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Just a couple weeks. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, anything else on why being understood is something that I guess let's flip it around from how we talk about it to why we think it's important that clients take responsibility to be understood as we close out this discussion.
I just think if you're not satisfied with how your business is operating, or that your people don't understand what's going on, or your customers, if you're just not hitting the ball out of the park like you think you should be, it's probably a positioning issue. I mean, there could be a lot of other things as well. But if you don't have that one right, none of the other stuff's going to work. And it's not that difficult to do. It's worth playing it out on the wall.
Right.
It's not a whole rebranding. We're
No.
not talking about a
No.
whole rebranding. It's a positioning exercise that then you use as a lens for
Yeah.
all the other things.
It helps clarify.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pat.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yes. Thanks.
All right. So if you can't find somebody next time, and I'm still sitting here, is that how I get invited back?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
You'll be back.
All right.
Thank you.